everyone. Welcome to another episode of Very Cold Lasagna, the podcast that houses a safe and open listening platform for casual, cold, and even the dumbest takes on the world of WWE, AEW, the NFL, and the wide world of pro wrestling and sports in general. I'm your host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning in to this fine episode number 79 of this freezing cold podcast that is always in the very cold fridge that houses that icy cold yet spicy lasagna in there as well. Today, it's a good show for you all, but also kind of a bittersweet one because it's week 18. Well, it was week 18. It meant the end of the regular season. Usually, it's week 17 that would bring us the end, but it's the end of the regular season, part 2. Yes, it is part 2 of the NFL season finale of this 2021 season. We're here to talk about it, all the games that happened, all the winners and losers, and when we're all done with that, we'll be checking in on the playoff picture as it is now officially set as the road to Los Angeles officially begins with Super Wildcard Weekend. Obviously, we'll be talking about Super Wildcard Weekend as we get closer to Wildcard Weekend. Week 18. I honestly, usually the last week of the regular season most mainly consists of a bunch of meaningless games, but also it's one of those weeks where it gets really intense with the playoff picture. Anything can change, anything can happen. But then there's also those years where it's just kind of like it's already set in stone. There's nothing to play for. Such as the case was in 2017 where there's just absolutely nothing going on. But this year there's just so many things happening. There's one of those interesting weeks of the season because there was just a lot on the line still. 2 divisions still up for grabs, seeding still needing to be decided, 3 spots still unfulfilled, all around the league. Again, typically it was week 17 that would bring us all that craziness, and now 1 extra week to make that happen. A new chapter began, week 18. So, heading into this week 18, we had a lot of playoff scenarios still into play. 4 teams in the AFC were still eligible for the top seed in the Titans, the Chiefs, the Bengals, and the Patriots. Obviously, the Titans had the easiest path, but also had the most trap-worthy path to the top seed. All they had to do was beat the Houston Texans in week 18, and the top seed would be theirs. The Chiefs also, one of the more favorable Super Bowl contenders, both in the preseason and right now. They had to beat the Denver Broncos, but they also had to hope Houston would pull off a crazy upset over the Titans. And the Bengals and the Patriots had a lot of crazy yet unrealistic scenarios. And as for the AFC East, still remained wide open as hell. For the Bills, they can beat on the New York Jets to close out the division. For the Patriots, all they need to do is just take care of the recently eliminated Miami Dolphins and hope that the Jets and Zach Wilson somehow pulled off an upset. And then for the Colts, one last chance to win and get in. All they had to do was beat the all-elite Jacksonville Jaguars in the land of AEW, where, the Colts haven't won in quite a while. But should they somehow lose, it kind of opened the door for the Chargers and the Steelers to get in. So for the Steelers and the Ravens, it was kind of a win, and you need a lot of help, or you're going home. So whoever won that game would immediately check out the others. So the Steelers needed to beat Baltimore and hope that the Jaguars beat the Colts somehow. And they had to hope that the Raiders-Chargers game on Sunday night didn't tie. And for the Ravens, who if they beat the Steelers, they could have made a backdoor entrance into the playoffs by beating the Steelers and hope that the Colts, Chargers, and the Dolphins all lost their games. And then, of course, in the last AFC slot, you can't end the regular season without a true win or go home game on Sunday night between the AFC West rivals, the Raiders and the Chargers. On the NFC side of things, not as complicated as the AFC. Aside from seeding, you had one division left up for grabs and a wild card spot up for grabs. The NFC West still was undecided. Either the Rams or the Cardinals were going to be the division champs. The Rams had the easiest path. All they had to do was beat up on the 49ers. If they couldn't, it was for Arizona. So, speaking of that last wildcard spot, that was still up for grabs. And then the 49ers, they could not only just play spoiler for the Rams, but had they beat the Rams, they were in the running for that last wildcard spot. But if they somehow lost to the Rams, it opened the door for the Saints if they beat the Falcons. So, a lot of crazy things happening in this Week 18 as we chug along into the playoffs. But, man, this was kind of a week that went wild. And this was the first chapter 1 of this new Week 18, this extra week, as you may call it, in this new NFL, like in this new NFL scheduling, I guess you can call it. So we get into this new Week 18, pretty much more of the same, but also brought in some crazy things along with it. So we get into the first slate of games on a Saturday primetime schedule on ESPN. The Kansas City Chiefs beat the Denver Broncos 28-24. The Broncos were making it pretty hard for the Chiefs. They pretty much grounded and pounded the Chiefs with the running game of Javonte Williams and Melvin Gordon for much of the game. But Denver, when they were in the red zone trying to extend that lead, oh man, Melvin Gordon got stripped of the ball, and he got stripped by Melvin Ingram, and one of the Chiefs defenders ran that baby back for a scoop and score and changed the entire game with more than 2 minutes left in the game. And that scoop and score touchdown by the Chiefs pretty much like ended Denver's hopes of a comeback. Denver's hope of helping the Titans get that number 1 seed early. So the Chiefs held on to beat the Denver Broncos 28-24, and it gave a little cause for pause for Tennessee, and gave them a little more pressure to get that number 1 seed the next day. The Dallas Cowboys beat the Philadelphia Eagles 51-26. It was pretty much a tune-up game for both teams. Then we get to the Sunday slate of games. The early morning slate first. The Detroit Lions beat the Green Bay Packers 37-30. Green Bay pretty much had nothing to play for. They played Aaron Rodgers and the starters for like one half, and that was pretty much it. But the Detroit Lions, they were just, I guess it was just their last game of the season. Like, they just wanted to get one more win just for fuck's sakes. They decided to pull out literally every hat trick they had in their playbook, whether it was trick passes, fake punts, whatnot. They pretty much pulled out all the stops just to get their 3rd win of the season, but also cost themselves the first overall pick in the NFL draft. So I guess the golden prophecy of the Detroit Lions this season, again, unfulfilled. So they beat the Packers 37-30 in what was essentially another meaningless game. The Washington football team beat the New York Giants 22-7 in a game that I thought that was going to be a game for Taylor Heinicke to give one last impression for Washington to potentially be their starter next year. But instead, it became a game where Antonio Gibson, their running back, to have his best game of the season in what was essentially a useless game. And yeah, the Giants, boy, they are so hopeless at this point. But I guess there's a little, very small glimmer of hope, because the next day, GM Dave Gettleman finally retired, but for whatever reason, they still have their head coach Joe Judge. So the Minnesota Vikings beat the Chicago Bears 31-17 in a game that was just one last showcase for Zimmer ball and Bears football, as Andy Dalton threw a pick six to Patrick Peterson in the last 4 minutes of the game to seal the victory for the Vikings. And the next day, both their head coach and GM duos of the Bears, Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace, and Mike Zimmer and Rick Spielman of the Vikings, both gone, both fired the next day on Black Monday. The Cleveland Browns beat the Cincinnati Bengals in another meaningless game for both teams, 21-17. The Bengals, they are already resting Joe Burrow and their key starters, and Baker Mayfield, his offseason already began before the game even began, because he was already getting shoulder surgery prior to that. The Tennessee Titans beat the Houston Texans to lock up the number 1 seed, 28-25. But, the Texans made life so much difficult to get to that point for Tennessee because Davis Mills, having the game of his life, trying to make that number 1 seed for Tennessee hard as hell. But Titans extended that lead, made things a little bit more easier for themselves, but, still letting the Texans crawl back into it. So they get what they wanted, a week off to get their king, Derrick Henry, back. And probably one of the most disappointing games of the season for at least the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts lose to the all-elite Jacksonville Jaguars, 26-11. Oh my God. So, despite its fans showing up as clowns to show both its protests to GM Trent Baalke, as well as its ownership, led by Shahid Khan, as well as the stupidity that is all elite wrestling, led by its con man, Tony Khan, Trevor Lawrence, as well as the Josh Allen-led defense, put on perhaps their best game of the season, as they pretty much shut down Jonathan Taylor and made Carson Wentz look like a total fraud that he is, and the Colts just completely collapsed in what was essentially a win and get in gift for them. The Colts were essentially the clowns on this day. The Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Baltimore Ravens 16-13 in overtime in a game where neither team could practically move the ball downfield much. And, the Ravens had no Lamar Jackson still. And, that was not a good way to end the season. But, still, Tyler Huntley did try to do as much as he can with the offense. But the Steelers did just enough for Chris Boswell to kick the game-winning field goal and eliminate the Ravens, essentially. So with the Colts losing, their eyes were now peeled for what was going to happen later on in Vegas on Sunday night. In the afternoon slate of games, the Tampa Bay Bucks beat the Carolina Panthers 41-17. Tom Brady and the offense overcame a slow start and turned that slow start into a total ass whooping on Sam Darnold and the Panthers for the second time in 3 weeks? Yeah. And I don't know why the Rams do this to me at this time. The San Francisco 49ers beat the LA Rams 27-24 in overtime. The Rams were kicking the Niners' ass 17-3 at halftime. Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, this defense were rolling all over Jimmy Garbage Fail, no whether he's 50-50 or not. They were rolling over their asses at halftime. But then another typical Detroiting by Stafford and this Rams team turned into light again as the Niners scored 17 unanswered to tie the game. And even though Cooper, it was a Cooper Kupp or Tyler Higbee, I don't know, I don't remember, but the Rams did score the go-ahead touchdown before the 2-minute warning. But then they let Jimmy G score the game-tying touchdown to Juwan Jennings and force overtime. From there, Robbie Gould capped off a long-ass drive to take the lead, and then, of course, Matthew Stafford typically choked the Rams' opportunity to win the game, to underthrow a pass that was meant for Odell Beckham, and instead corner, and I'll give him credit for this, Ambry Thomas sealed the deal with an interception. Thanks a lot, LA. Thanks a lot. I'll give Niners fans credit for this. The fans really showed up in LA. But god damn it, the playoff prophecy. God damn it. The delusional playoff hopes have finally been confirmed. The Niners are going to the playoffs. And they'll be facing the Dallas Cowboys. But at least it'll be on Nickelodeon. That's the good thing about this. It'll be on Nickelodeon. The Niners, hopefully, they're going to get... The prophecy will fully be complete when they get smashed on Nickelodeon, and Jimmy Garoppolo will get the Nickelodeon Valuable Player Award. That's the only thing that could come good out of this. So even with this loss, the Rams get the NFC West, which I'll talk about in just a bit. But God damn it, for the Rams, this is certainly not going to feel good for them. Choking things up to the delusional 49ers. Again, making that pipe dream playoff philosophy official. So speaking of the NFC West, the Seahawks spoiled the Cardinals' dreams of trying to clinch the NFC West, 38-30. So like the Cardinals, you know, I don't know if they were scoreboard watching, but you know they had a golden opportunity to clinch the NFC West themselves. You know, see the Rams are choking it up, but they were choking it up themselves during this game. Kyler Murray and this Cards team, you know, they were just awful. They were awful this game, and they had their own grand finale performance of chokage to Russell Wilson, Rashad Penny, this offense, and a defense that was pretty bad all season. They let the Seahawks have their own grand finale performance on the road, and the Hawks gifted the Rams the division when the Rams were losing in overtime. Like, you can't make this shit up. So anyway, the Seahawks get one last win for maybe Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson. Maybe. So the New Orleans Saints beat the Atlanta Falcons 30-20. It was pretty much a do or die game for the Saints. Because, you know, had they won here and the Niners lost, they were in. So they did all they can to open up a can of whoop ass on the remaining fetters of the Falcons. But as I mentioned earlier, the delusional 49ers decided to whoop on some ass on the LA Rams, and the Saints' own can of whoop ass was just not enough, and they were eliminated. The Miami Dolphins beat the New England Patriots 33-24. The Dolphins were just all over the Patriots in this one, but Mac Jones and the offense were trying to claw back into this one, and they even tried to go for a Miami Miracle in the final seconds of the game, but that ended pretty poorly for them, and that resulted in the Dolphins extending the final score of this game. So yeah, the Dolphins beat the Patriots and actually swept them. They swept the season series with them, 33-24. But despite all that, despite being the Patriots twice this season, and despite the season tale of two halves, Miami head coach Brian Flores shown the door the next day. It's a real head-scratching decision by Dolphins ownership. It's really weird. So anyway, the Buffalo Bills beat the New York Jets 27-10. Slow start for Josh Allen turned into a furious blowout sprint for the offense. And the Bills, even before the game ended, they already clinched the AFC East thanks to the Dolphins. Then in the Sunday night finale, the LA Clippers, yes, the Clippers lost to the Las Vegas Raiders 35-32 in overtime. It was a true winner-go-home game to end the season. It was drunk as hell. That saw the Raiders pass rush dominate Justin Herbert, and Justin Herbert didn't have a good game in the first half, but he led the comeback to force overtime, and both teams trade field goals with one another, and everyone watching at home thought the Raiders would just run out the clock and then just tie the game and take a tie. And in effect, it would just literally dick out the Steelers and send both the Raiders and the Chargers to the playoffs. But head coach Brandon Staley of the Chargers completely clippered up. Not bolt up, clipper up. He called a timeout before the last third down of the game, and that resulted in the Raiders getting the first down, getting to Daniel Carlson's range to win the game. How stupid of a decision did you have to make? The Raiders were trying to get you into the playoffs. Your division rival was trying to help your ass. And Brandon Staley calls the timeout. So instead of the Raiders and the Clippers, the Raiders essentially helped the Steelers get into the postseason. Instead, well, I guess since it's their division rivals, they decided to dig out their division rivals instead. But either way, This was a stupid decision by Brandon Staley to call a timeout because the Raiders were essentially helping you, even though they're division rivals. They're trying to help you get into the postseason. This is such a wild way to end the biggest regular season ever. And man, what a way! What a way to end one of the best season finales in my lifetime. So that was week 18, the extra week of the regular season, the season finale part 2 of the NFL. So what do you guys think about it? What do you guys think about this extra week? Did it help? Did it hurt the NFL? What do you guys think about it? Should the NFL go back to 17 weeks, 17 games, or should they keep 18 games? Let me know. But overall, I thought this was pretty cool. Pretty cool. Now for the winners and losers of the final week of the regular season, the Las Vegas Raiders. You know, for all the adversity, for all the drama, from the John Gruden emails to Henry Ruggs, to all the releases that they've had to put out. You know, this team has been through a lot of adversity, and you know they've endured a lot of bad losses, and yet they've won 3 or 4 straight to get into the postseason. You know, they got themselves a playoff berth. And, you know, I've mentioned countless times in the show, the ultimate goal of your season is to be in the Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl. But, you know, this is a team that, you know, is not Super Bowl worthy yet. But, you know, they're taking their steps to get back there. Given the right coach, given the right quarterback, maybe. And, you know, for the Raiders, this was a big step. This was a good morale booster. I guess you could say that. For all the adversity that they've been through. Who knows? Maybe Rich Bisaccia could be the right guy to lead this team on a full-time basis. Who knows? And you got yourself a good decent defensive unit. Who knows about the up and down performance of the offense? But overall, this Raiders team, you know, could be a little bit of an X factor in the first round. But either way, getting to the postseason in spite of this adversity is a feat of itself. Texans quarterback Davis Mills, you know, he may have lost this game, but I think this last month, I think he's really made the Texans think of, you know, him being the starter next season. And, you know, he could be the guy. I think he could be the guy that if, you know, the Texans are really willing to move on from Deshaun Watson and Deshaun Watson willing to move on from them, they at least have a plan in place. With Davis Mills, you know, he could sling the ball, he can move around he can run out of the pocket. He's decently accurate. He still has some things to work on, but if you get him some help, get him an offensive line, get him somebody besides Brandon Cooks on the opposite end, you know, Davis Mills, you know, he can be a pretty good quarterback, and you know, maybe the Texans rebuild may be faster than we all anticipated. Now for some of the losers, both LA teams, starting with the LA Rams. You know, the Rams, you know, they've won how many games? Like 5 or 6 games. And into this game, you know, you had some key wins against the Cardinals, the Vikings, the Seahawks, the Ravens. Again, you beaten up on your division rivals. You swept the Seahawks. You got a key victory against the Vikings, and well, I guess beating up Ravens counts for something, I suppose. So you're going to this game with all the momentum in the world, and you're leading 17-3 at halftime. You know, you have all this momentum. Your offense is doing pretty well, with Cooper Kupp being unstoppable. It's a terrible Niners secondary, and Matthew Stafford's doing pretty well, despite, you know, him getting like constantly harassed by the Niners pass rush. And then you decide to shit the bed in the second half. You know, when the Niners suddenly began to explode in the second half with the running game, mid-range and short-range Jimmy G throws that turned into big chunk plays. This pretty much became the thing that got your ass beat in the Monday night game back in week 10. The defense had no answers for whatever the 49ers were throwing at them in the second half. And Matthew Stafford again folded under pressure, throwing interception, and including the last one in overtime. So it's still apparent you can't take the Lions out of Matthew Stafford. You can't take the Detroiting out of Matthew Stafford. And this is not a good way to clinch the NFC West. So even though both the Rams and the Cardinals are struggling, it's apparent the Rams are clearly the more struggling team right now. So if that persists next Monday night in their game against the Arizona Cardinals in prime time, the Rams are going to be ousted in the first round in their house that also hosts the Super Bowl. So you really want to give that first impression to the fans that are also in the stadium that's going to host a Super Bowl in like a month? Do you? Oh my. The LA Clippers. Yes, the LA Clippers. Justin Herbert did all he can despite throwing 2 interceptions throughout this game against the Raiders. He did all he can to help the Chargers force overtime. And this was despite the many problems that persisted throughout this game for the Chargers. The run defense failing to stop Josh Jacobs and Jalen Richard. The receiving core, led by Keenan Allen and Mike Williams, having butterfingers all night long. Even in overtime, sure, they managed to get some critical 4th down catches to extend the game for the Chargers. But even then, it was a big issue. Had they not caught that, the game would have been well over for the Chargers. But the biggest problem of all for the Chargers was the coaching. What's the coaching? Especially, as I mentioned before, the timeout on 3rd down, the last 3rd down in the game, in overtime. Brandon Staley called a timeout to get his defense prepped up for a better play call. When the Raiders were just going to run down the middle, and they still did, and still got first down to get into Daniel Carlson's field goal range. It's just baffling. It's just really very baffling. So, had Brandon Staley not called timeout, the Raiders would have been forced into a much longer field goal. They would have called a timeout much earlier. So, it's instead of getting in-game help from the Raiders, who were clearly playing for the tie, they elected to, thanks to the Chargers' stupidity, go for it, end the Chargers season early, and get the Steelers one last ride with Big Ben. So the Clippers elected to start the offseason early for themselves. So for the LA Clippers, Chargers fans, the Clippers, there's a lot of things to point out that went wrong for the Chargers this season. This was a season that they had promise with, but this year is going to be one of them. This 3rd down call, this timeout by Brandon Staley, it's going to be one of them. The Indianapolis Colts. Can I ask you? I'm looking at Frank Reich. I'm looking at Carson Wentz. I'm looking at pretty much everybody on that team. Let me ask you a couple of questions. How, with a win and in opportunity sitting in front of you against the most terrible team in the NFL that now holds the number 1 overall pick in the draft, that doesn't just have terrible ownership, it also has terrible coaching, a terrible all-elite wrestling company, and a fan base that literally went into the last game of the regular season clowning its own team because of its clowny general manager that also clowned my team. Yet the Colts still managed to fall flat on their face. How? How do they fuck this up so bad? The Colts, my God, they looked every bit how they began their season. They began their season like shit, and they ended the season like shit. Carson Wentz looked atrocious with his throws. He took too long holding the ball, that resulted in him getting sacked many times by that Josh Allen-led defense. And the offensive line was really bad in that game. And a really good defensive line, a really good pass rush for the Colts was non-existent. And I was seeing the game feed on Bleacher Report, social media, and even a little bit throughout the CBS broadcast itself that DeForest Buckner was only playing on third down. Like, why was he only in third down situations? Why was he not in all three downs? He's clearly one of the better pass rushers that the Colts have, and yet he's only playing on third down. Like, you didn't trade DeForest Buckner for the 49ers to only play in third down situations. Like, what are you doing? And then the Jags, when the Jags took away the Colts' only offensive weapon in Jonathan Taylor, it made the Colts like non-existent. It like made the Colts look completely clueless on offense. So in one single game, pretty much of all teams, the all elite clown show in the Jacksonville Jaguars exposed just how much the Colts are lacking in offensive firepower outside of Jonathan Taylor and maybe Michael Pittman, and exposed just how much Carson Wentz truly limits the potential of this team, and perhaps couldn't even get past the first round had they made it. Yeah. So a lot of things to address in the offseason for the Indianapolis Colts, and that includes Carson Wentz. So those were your winners and losers of Week 18, and that was the end of the regular season. The end of Week 18. So let me know your thoughts about this final week of the regular season and your overall thoughts of the regular season itself. You know, as we conclude the regular season of this biggest regular season ever, I gotta say, it was a pretty mixed season. You know, the first 5 weeks of the season were pretty damn good, and then the middle portion of the season was, it was all right. It was all right. It pretty much went back to it. It's like mid-season, like blowout city portion, like nothing exciting, but nothing too terrible. And then we get to the month of December. It was pretty wild. It was pretty wild. In Week 18, the extra week, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. It was like one of the best like season finales I enjoyed in my time as a fan. And this is one of the reasons I've been enjoying the NFL football more so than WWE, AEW, and pro wrestling so much more. Like, I gotta be honest with you, I haven't watched pro wrestling since September, because of football, and I gotta have it because wrestling sucks. It absolutely sucks. Well, football has been a joy to watch. It has been really fun to watch. And I know wrestling fans will be like, "Oh, why are you watching 3 hours of men just hugging each other and slinging a football around their dicks for like 3 hours straight?" Well, why am I watching half naked men wrestle each other and flip around the ring, four-sided ring for 60 minutes? Answer me that. So overall, this NFL regular season, a pretty, like, I say if I had to rate it, I hate doing ratings. I'd say I'd give it an 8. I would give it an 8. So it was a good 5 weeks, 5-6 weeks, and then a little rind, Krabby Patty in the middle, and then the last month and a half, pretty damn good. So that was my final Week 18 recap, my final general NFL recap for the regular season for this year, for this season. Let me know what you think. Before we end the show today, we're going to do one last playoff picture check-in before the Filthy Casuals guide to the Super Wild Card weekend. Yes, playoff coverage begins once again, pretty much how the podcast began last year. So really quick, let's take a look at the road to SoFi Stadium, which begins this Saturday with Super Wildcard Weekend. In the NFC, we have the top seed, the Green Bay Packers, and the first round matchups. You got an interesting slate. Well, not so interesting with the 2 seed Tampa Bay Buccaneers hosting the 7 seed Philadelphia Eagles, but some good first round matchups with the San Francisco 49ers as the 6th seed taking on the 3 seeded and NFC East champion Dallas Cowboys, and the Arizona Cardinals at the 5 seed taking on the LA Rams in the Monday night closer. Yes, there's a Monday night game. In the AFC, the top seed Tennessee Titans in the first round matchups consist of the Pittsburgh Steelers taking on the Kansas City Chiefs, 7 seed Steelers, 2 seed Chiefs. First time that Patrick Mahomes will be playing in the wild card. The 6th seed New England Patriots take on the Buffalo Bills as the 3 seed in the 3 match of this season for these division rivals. And the Las Vegas Raiders as the 5 seed, coming off their big Sunday night win in the season finale against the 4 seed Cincinnati Bengals, the division champs of the AFC North. That is your playoff picture to begin this road to the Super Bowl. And what also is this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. Thank you for tuning in to this fine episode, recapping Week 18, the final week of the 2021 regular season. Coming up this week, we got my in-depth recap of my San Francisco 49ers beating the LA Rams in overtime. And we'll also be looking at, in that episode, a preview to their Nickelodeon matchup with the Dallas Cowboys in Arlington, and as well as in another episode, the Filthy Casuals Guide. It is returning. It is back. My Filthy Casuals Guide to the Super Wildcard Weekend. Yes, the episode that began it all, the Filthy Casuals Guide that began it all last year, is making a comeback. So stay tuned for that. But for now, thank you for tuning in to this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. I am your host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning in to this fine episode number 79. Make sure you listen to everything and follow everything in relation to Very Cold Lasagna. And as always, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of pro wrestling and sports in the fridge, cold as ice, but also tasty, like that hot lasagna that you warm up in the microwave. Anyway, everyone, until next time, peace out.